Chapter 8. I moved away from my story because I wanted to tell you the truth. You think I'm crazy. Perhaps I am out of my mind. I've lived with this secret for 12 years now. I'm a murderer. I murdered my wife. My house has been haunted since then. And last night I realized the truth for the first time in 12 years. The ghost in my bedroom isn't a playful poltergeist. Its name isn't Goldie. It's the ghost of my dear wife, Julie. It was a playful ghost at first. But now it's jealous and evil, as I was 12 years ago. Last night I suddenly saw Julie alive again. Her head was the photo, her body was the dress. She was dancing round the room. Oh, she danced very beautifully. Her beautiful dress was shining in the moonlight. I sat in bed and watched her. I forgot about the evil laughter. I forgot about my fears and worries. I forgot about our game. I could only think of Julie, alive again after all these years. It's not possible, I said to myself. I can believe it. Julie continued to dance and dance. I could hear music in my mind. I suddenly saw myself at a party. There was noise and laughter in the room. There were young men all around the room. My Julie was dancing to the music and the young men were looking at her. Then they looked at me and laughed. While they were laughing at me, I became angry and jealous. My mind became full of evil. Go away! I screamed at the young men. Julie is mine, mine. Can't you see? The young men laughed louder and louder. I became angrier and angrier. I jumped out of bed and ran towards the dancing ghost. The music continued to play in my mind. The young men continued to watch me and to laugh at me. I picked up a chair and hit the young men with it. Then I hit the dancing ghost. I hit the beautiful dress while it was moving round the room. Suddenly, the music in my mind stopped. The dancing stopped. The young men in the room disappeared. Their faces became shadows, then nothing. Their laughter stopped. I hit the dress again, not the picture, but just the dress. It shook, then it fell slowly to the floor. The photo was still at the top of the dress. The photo and the dress lay on the floor. Julie's smiling eyes looked up at me from the floor. They've gone, I said softly. The young men have gone. You're mine again. All mine. I stood next to the dress and looked at it for a long time. Nothing happened, it didn't move. I touched it. It was real. I touched the photo. It was real too. Julie's eyes smiled at me from behind the glass. "I want you to be mine forever," I said to the photo, and I went back to my bed and got a pillow. Then I returned to the dress on the floor. I put the pillow over the photo and held it there. I held it there for a long time. The dress tried to move away but couldn't. Soft cries came from the photo. In the end, the dress stopped moving. I smiled to myself. "I've murdered Julie a second time," I thought. I laughed loudly. Suddenly, a great scream came from the photo on the floor. One scream, then another and another. I jumped back in fear. The screaming stopped. The photo of Julie began to change. It wasn't smiling now. It was crying. I touched the glass on the photo. It was wet. Then the photo moved away from my hand. I stood up. The photo began to move off the floor very, very slowly. It came towards me and stopped in front of my face. Then it fell to the floor and the glass broke into 1,000 pieces. A hand began to pull the photo into little pieces. It pulled off the hair, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. Soon there were little pieces of paper on the floor next to the dress. Then a great wind went through the room. It threw the dress across the floor. It threw the little pieces of paper to every part of the room. They fell to the floor slowly, like snow. Then the wind stopped. The ghost was still in the room. I could feel it. That's the end of the game, I thought. I'll go back to bed and put the plug in. I've had enough of this. I picked up the pillow from the floor and went back to bed. I was very tired and wanted to sleep. I reached over the side of my bed to find the plug. I'll send the ghost away and go to sleep, I thought. I touched the plug. But when I touched it, I heard evil laughter. Then I realized the game wasn't finished. The plug moved away from my hand. I tried to find it again. Every time I touched it, it moved away. I took hold of the cord and followed it with my fingers. Then I found the plug again but couldn't pick it up. It moved across the floor. I got out of bed. I was on my knees on the floor. I could see the plug in the moonlight. I could see it very clearly. I went towards it on my knees. When I reached it, it moved away again. The evil laughter continued. "Please, Julie," I said. "Please give me the plug." The plug came towards me and danced in front of my eyes, but I couldn't touch it. "I'm not going to play now," I said. "I'm leaving the room." I got up and went towards the door. I tried to open the door but couldn't. I hit the door hard with my hands. I pushed and pulled, but I couldn't open it. I was a prisoner in my own room. Where can I go? What can I do? I cried. I'm your prisoner now. I must get out. Please let me out. Please. Please. The evil laughter stopped. The room was silent. Then something hit the window lightly. After this, I heard a scratching sound, like fingers on glass. It isn't the glass over Julie's photo, I thought. I listened again. The sound was coming from the window. I went towards it and looked out. There was a face at the window, not Julie's face or the face of any person. It was the face of a cat. The cat was looking into my room. It wasn't the fat black cat. It was a white cat. I've seen this cat before somewhere, I thought, but where? I tried to think. Suddenly, I remembered. Of course. It was Julie's cat. Julie loved animals. She had a cat like this when she was alive, a beautiful white cat. When Julie died, I mean, after I murdered her, the cat disappeared. I never saw it again. But now it was back. I looked through the window. The cat's face was against mine. Only the glass was between us. The cat's eyes were red and angry. It scratched the glass wildly. I hit the glass from the inside, but the cat didn't go away. It began to cry like a baby. Stop it! Stop it! I screamed. I ran back to the bedroom door and tried to open it. Again, it wasn't possible. The cat continued to cry outside the window. I suddenly wanted to kill it. I looked round the room and tried to find something. I was really angry. My wardrobe was still on the floor. There were broken pieces everywhere. I picked up a thick piece of wood and ran towards the window. The cat looked at me with its red eyes. It cried louder and louder. I hit the window hard with the piece of wood. It broke into 1,000 pieces. I laughed. Then I looked through the broken window, but there was nothing there. No cat, no sound, nothing. Wonderful, I thought. It's gone away. Perhaps it was never there. Perhaps I only imagined it. I must stay calm. I'm imagining things. But I wasn't imagining things. I heard a sound behind me and jumped. It was the sound of a baby. I turned round in fear and there it was. The white cat. It was looking up at me and there was blood on its face. I looked at my hands. There was blood on them too. I was still holding the piece of wood. "So you're still alive!" I screamed at the cat. I ran towards it and tried to hit it again. I hit the floor hard. I hit the cat over the head. I tried to hit it again, but it wasn't there. Then it appeared again in another corner of the room. It was looking at me with its red eyes. I ran after it and tried to hit it. Every time I tried to do this, the cat disappeared. Every time it appeared, it was red with blood. Soon its body was red with blood, but it appeared again and again. Here. There. In front of me. Behind me. On the floor. On the bed. In the air. At last, the crying stopped. The cat disappeared and didn't come back. All these things have happened in my mind, I thought. It was my imagination, just my imagination. I must keep calm. Now, what was I doing? Yes. The plug. I was looking for the plug. I must find it. I'm a prisoner in my own room. The ghost is playing jokes on me. If I find the plug, I can send it away. I got down on my knees to look for the plug. It was still on the floor next to my bed. I went towards it slowly and quietly like a cat. The plug was a bird and I was a cat. "I'm going to catch you, little bird," I said softly. Nearer and nearer. Then I jumped. The plug was in my hands. I had it. I had it. Now I must find the socket. I touched the wall with my fingers. The socket. Yes. Here it is. The ghost didn't pull the plug out of my hands. I put the plug into the socket and the light came on. I got into bed and lay back. At last. My room was full of light. I looked round the room and couldn't believe my eyes. There wasn't any broken glass on the floor. The wardrobe wasn't on the floor. The window wasn't broken. All the things in my room were in order. The photo of Julie was on the wall. Julie's face was smiling down at me. The wardrobe was in its place in the corner of the room. The wardrobe door was shut. I got up and opened it. My clothes were in the wardrobe. Julie's dress was there too. My chair was in its place. I went to the bedroom door and tried to open it. It opened easily. I shut it again. Then I began to laugh at myself. "I imagine all these things," I said. The dance, the cat, they were just my imagination. I went back to bed. I looked at my bedside clock. It was 3:30. I sat in bed for about 10 minutes. I was thinking. The light was on, but I could feel something strange. The ghost was still in the room. The plug was back in place, but the ghost was still there. It's broken the last rule of the game, I thought. I've put the plug in, but it hasn't gone away. This thought filled me with fear. All the rules were broken now. The ghost didn't disappear when the light came on. I switched the light off, from the switch, but the evil presence was still there. I pulled the plug out and put it back a number of times, but the ghost stayed in the room. The room was in order but full of evil. I switched off the light and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Then I tried to sleep with the light on, but I couldn't. In the end, I turned the light off and lay in bed. The moon was still shining brightly. The ghost didn't play any jokes now, it stayed in my room quietly. It was there all the time. I lay in bed and listened, but the room was silent. I could hear my heart. I could hear my own breathing. I lay in bed for a long time. My eyes were open. I could see every detail of my room in the moonlight. Suddenly, I heard heavy breathing. It was coming from a corner of the room. Then I saw a dark shadow in the corner of the room. It was like a black cloud. The sound of heavy breathing was coming from the shadow. The shadow began to move towards me very slowly. I tried to jump out of bed, but couldn't move in my fear. I lay there and the thin black cloud came nearer and nearer and nearer. Soon it was high in the air above my bed. I looked up at it. Then it began to come down on me. The room was now in complete darkness. The shadow cut out the moonlight. Soon it was over me and all round me. I could still hear heavy breathing. I could feel hot breath on my face, the breath of an evil ghost. I tried to scream, but couldn't. I had no breath. At the same time I could hear another sound. It came from outside. It was the sound of a cat outside my window. The cat was crying like a baby. I lay under the dark shadow. I knew it was the shadow of death. Chapter 9. Last night I was in the shadow of death, but I'm still alive. At this minute I'm in my study and I'm writing this story. It's only 10:00 p.m. but I'm very tired. I didn't sleep for a minute last night. The shadow didn't hurt me. When the morning light came, the shadow disappeared. I got up and left my bedroom. The shadow disappeared, but the ghost was still in the room. In fact, It's still there now. I'm in my study now and the ghost can't hurt me here, I hope. I came to my study at 5:30 this morning. I've written this story since that time. My desk is covered with papers. I've been here for more than 16 hours and I'm still writing. I haven't eaten. I haven't washed and I'm still wearing my night clothes. It's cold outside. My night clothes are made of thin cloth, but I can't feel the cold. I can only feel one thing: I'm very, very tired. I'm near the end of my story. In one long day I've tried to describe my life since Julie's death. Perhaps you don't believe that any of these things happened. Perhaps you think I'm crazy. Perhaps you're saying, you're a murderer and your mind has punished you. Perhaps you think there was no ghost. It was all in my mind, I made it all up. If you think any of these things, you're wrong. All these things really happened. My story began with a playful poltergeist and ended with an evil ghost. At the beginning we played a happy game. But in time this game became a dangerous one. This game has continued for 12 years and Julie was my wife for 12 years. The game is like my life with Julie. At the beginning I was happy with her, but I became jealous of her friends. Then my mind became evil and I murdered Julie and murdered our life together. I wanted Julie to be mine and only mine. The same thing happened in the game. At the beginning it was a happy one. Then the ghost became jealous. It wanted me to be alone. It became evil and has tried to kill me. Now there's only one question on my mind: will the ghost murder me? Just now, I'm trying not to think about this question. I'll find out the answer when I go to bed. I don't want to think about it now. But what can I think about? Nothing in my past is important to me now. Filbert Wiley's adventures are like a dream. The game with the ghost has become my life. But I can stop the game and change my life. There's one way I can do it. I must tell this secret to someone. Then I know the game will stop. Tomorrow Louis will be here, but I won't play chess with him. I'll tell him this story. Then I'll be all right again. What will Louis think when I tell him the story? I don't know. The game will end if I tell Louis the secret. But that's a big if. Will I tell Louis my secret? I don't know. If I live through the night, then I'll tell him. If I don't live, then my story will be in these papers. Perhaps Louis will find these papers and publish them. But they aren't in order. There are papers all over my desk. There aren't any numbers on the pages. I've written everything in pencil and it's hard to read. If Louis wants to publish these papers, he'll have to put them in order and type them again. I think he can sort them out very well. I haven't thought of a good title for the book. Perhaps Dangerous Game is a good title. But my fears are making me crazy. I'm not going to die. I'll put the papers in order and publish the book. Louis will never see these papers. It's been a strange day, strange in many ways. I haven't written a word for a month, but today I've written a book. It's January 25th, 12 years exactly since Julie's death. We've been together for 24 years. What a day it's been. Yesterday the sun shone in a clear sky. But today it's been dark and cloudy, a real winter's day. I'll remember today for a long time. During the day, while writing, I've looked out of the window a few times. Now it's dark, of course. But earlier my garden was empty, no cats or anything like that. But I haven't had time to look out of the window very much. My story has been on my mind all day. I've tried to remember every detail. I've tried to tell you every detail. Try to imagine me at this minute. I'm sitting at my desk. My desk light is on. I haven't closed the curtains of my study. The moon is up and I can see it through my study window. I'm alone in this big house. The house is dark and silent. My bedroom is at the other end of the house and sooner or later I must go to it. The bedroom door is shut, but someone is behind it. I know Julie's ghost is in the room. I know the ghost is waiting for me. I'll go into an evil world when I go into that room. When you're afraid, you look behind you all the time. You don't like the dark. Remember when you were a child? My bed was against the wall when I was a child. I never slept with my face towards the wall. I was afraid there was something behind me. I still have this fear. Tonight I have to go into my bedroom alone, and perhaps I'll never come out of it again alive. I've always been afraid of ghosts. When, as a child, I closed my curtains, I always looked at them. There were flowers on my curtain cloth, but I always saw faces in those flowers. Sometimes they were happy faces, sometimes they were evil faces. When I turned off the light, I often imagined those faces in the room all round me. Sometimes I cried and my mother came into the room. But if I cry tonight, who will come into my room? Who will say, "It's all right, my dearest. Go to sleep now. You've had a bad dream?" Nobody. I'll be alone. Alone with Polly, Julie, the ghost. You'll ask, why don't you leave the house? There's still time. Don't stay here. Don't play the game tonight. But I must play the game once more. I'm very sleepy, but I'll wake up. I always wake up when the game begins. Why don't I phone Louis? He can come here and stay with me tonight. I'll tell you something. I've tried to phone Louis a number of times this evening, but my line is dead. I hear nothing when I pick up the phone. I'm cut off from the world. So there's only one thing that I can do. I must play the game. What kind of game will it be tonight? I shake when I think about it. My heart is full of fear. My hand is shaking now while I'm writing these words. What will happen? I'll go into the bedroom. I won't have to pull out the plug to bring the ghost. The ghost is there already. I'll go to bed and the game will begin. But what kind of game will it be? How will it end? I know I'm talking too much, writing too much. I haven't got any more to tell you. So why am I writing? Because I want you to be with me. I'm writing because I'm afraid to leave this study. I'm all right here. But when I stop, I'll have to go to my bedroom. I think that time has come now. I must stop now. So I'll say good night to you, or perhaps it's goodbye. Perhaps it's goodbye, forever. Chapter 10. My name is Louis. I was William Harris's friend, as you already know from his story. I've added this ending to his book to complete the story. William died on the night of January 25, 2000. I talked to the police doctor. William died just before midnight, about an hour after he went to bed. Why did William die? Nobody can explain that. It's a mystery like so many things in his story. His life was a mystery and his death was a mystery too. William had no family and I was his only friend. The police have asked me many questions about William. But I haven't been able to tell them more than what is in his book. A lot of police officers have read William's papers. Some of them believe his story, others don't believe it. His death is a mystery. I found the pages of Dangerous Game in William's study on the night after his death. A few days later, I was able to take the papers home. All the papers were in the study, exactly as William left them. There were papers all over the desk and all over the floor. There were a lot of pencils on the desk too. I'm writing this ending to William's story 6 months after his death. I've just finished my work on his papers. William wrote Dangerous Game. I think the title is a good one, In One Long Day. But I needed 6 months to read and type his work. There weren't any numbers on the pages, so it took a long time to put them in order. William wrote the book very quickly and the pages were very hard to read. He didn't write in complete sentences. So it was very hard for me to turn the papers into a real book. I've broken the work into chapters. I hope it's been easy to read. I've given each chapter a title, but I haven't added a word to William's story and I haven't cut out anything. It's just as he wrote it. I've published this story because William wanted me to publish it. During this time I've asked myself many questions about William. Some of the answers to my questions are in William's book, but many aren't. For example, I knew William wasn't well, in his mind, I mean. There was always something on his mind. I could see this every time we met. He didn't eat well and he didn't sleep well. I could see this too. During the year before his death, he became thinner and thinner. He wasn't interested in food, in his work, in the chess games that we played. In fact, he wasn't interested in life. I'm sure he was interested in something. But this something was a mystery to me. He never told me about it. It was his secret. I wanted to call a doctor, but he never let me. During the year before his death, our games of chess were becoming silly. William never played seriously. He often stopped during a game and looked up towards the room above. He was trying to hear something. I once asked him about Poldy and he didn't want to tell me anything. Do you remember? In his book he says there was a knocking sound from the room above. Was there really a knocking sound? I don't know. I never heard anything. Was William crazy? Did all these things really happen, or did he imagine them? I don't know. I'm sure William had a wonderful imagination. Perhaps you've read his Filbert Wiley stories. If you have read them, you'll know a lot about William's imagination. In one of these stories, I can't remember the title, Filbert Wiley is a prisoner in a haunted house. Perhaps you remember the story. I thought of it when I read this book. William was a real writer. In his story William often says he was an uninteresting person. It's true he didn't have an interesting life. And what does interesting really mean? But I'm sure he had an interesting mind. You can see his mind at work in his detective stories. You can see it at work in this book. Did William murder Julie? Another interesting question. It isn't possible to say. I'm sure he loved her deeply. Perhaps William was jealous, but he never showed it. He described Julie very well in his story. She was a wonderful person. We all loved her. Of course, she was very different in character from William. People enjoyed being with her. She was always laughing and singing. She was very good company. She helped William a lot. She showed him the world. He enjoyed his life with Julie. After her death, he became a different person. He cut himself off from the world. He did nothing except work. In the end, I was his only friend. That's because I knew him from our student days. I knew him before he met Julie. I knew him very well. But there's still a lot that I don't know about him. Did he murder Julie? I find this hard to believe. But perhaps he did murder her. One strange fact is true. William died on the date that Julie died, January 25th, 12 years after her death. I can't explain it. I knew William wasn't well. I often asked him to leave his house. I asked him to come and stay with me, but he didn't want to leave his own place. Once or twice I offered to stay with him, but he didn't want my company. So after our chess games on a Wednesday, I always went home. We never talked very much during our games. I know he enjoyed my company. I enjoyed his. In his story he says he tried to phone me on the night of his death. He says the line was dead. That's a mystery too. I used the phone after I found him. I called the police, and the phone was in order. Did William imagine it was out of order? Was it really out of order? If it was, how did this happen? So either William's story is true or it isn't. If it is true, then we must accept it. William was haunted by an evil, jealous ghost. Whose ghost? I can't say, perhaps the story isn't true. Then we must believe that William imagined it all. This means that he was haunted by his own imagination. In the end, he really went crazy. He didn't live in our world. His imagination killed him. This can happen, of course, but we will never know the answer to the mystery. Now I can only describe in detail the night of Wednesday, January 26, 2000. I arrived at William's house at my usual time, just before 8 o'clock. The house was completely dark and this surprised me. There was usually a light on somewhere. I knocked at the front door and waited. There was no reply. This surprised me too. William usually opened the door immediately. Perhaps he's gone out, I thought. But no, That's not possible. He doesn't often go out and he's always at home on a Wednesday. He's never been out on a Wednesday. I knocked at the door more loudly, but there was still no reply. I tried to open the front door, but I couldn't. So I went to the back door. I knocked at this too and waited. Again, there was no reply. I tried to open this door too, but couldn't. I called out William, very loudly a number of times. There was no answer. I threw a few small stones lightly at the windows upstairs. Nobody came to any of the windows. This is very strange, I thought. I went round the house and looked at all the windows on the ground floor. They were shut. But in the end, I found a small window that was open. It was the kitchen window at the back of the house. I climbed through it, and it wasn't easy, and turned on the kitchen light. The kitchen was in order. William lived alone, but he was a very tidy person. The room was clean and tidy. I went straight to the living room. We always played chess in this room. I turned on the light. Again, the room was in order. The chessboard was on the table. The chess pieces were in a wooden box next to the board. That's strange, I thought. William usually puts the pieces on the board before I arrive. He's always ready for a game. When I noticed this, I began to worry. I began to call out William's name louder and louder. The name William rang through the empty house, but there was no reply. I went out of the living room and stood at the foot of the stairs. I called up the stairs, "William." Nobody answered me. Suddenly, worry became fear, fear for William. What was the matter? I ran upstairs, 3 steps at a time, and went straight to the study. Perhaps he's still working and hasn't heard me, I thought. I knocked at the study door and waited. There was no light under the door. Nobody answered, so I went in. I switched on the light. The room was very untidy. There were papers on the desk and on the floor. I didn't look at the papers at the time. It wasn't my business. I write books myself and I don't like other people to read my papers. I didn't know then that those papers were the pages of this book. They were the pages of the book that I've just finished working on. I discovered this later, when the police came. The police read William's story first and after a few days they gave it to me. When I left William's study, I didn't go straight to his bedroom for a very simple reason. Don't forget, it was only just after 8 o'clock. It was too early for anyone to be in bed. I went to every other room in the house. I was calling his name all the time. In the end, there was only one more room, the bedroom, and I went to it. The bedroom door was shut. I knocked at the door gently and waited. I knocked again. Nothing. I opened the door very gently. The room was quite dark. It was very cold in the room, I remember, but other parts of the house were warm. I began to shake in William's room. I don't know why, but I felt a strange fear. Was someone in the room? Was someone watching? Perhaps I only imagined this. I touched the wall to find the light switch. But in my fear, my heart was going wildly. I couldn't find it. Then I kicked something. I touched it. It was William's bedside table. I touched the top of the table and found the bedside light. I pressed the switch but the light didn't come on. Then I kicked something on the floor. It was the plug. I got down on my knees and found it. Why isn't it in the socket? I thought. I put the plug into the socket and the light came on. When I stood up, I looked round the room. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was very untidy and in a terrible state. 2 windows were broken and there was glass on the floor. There were clothes on the floor too, William's clothes and one of Julie's party dresses. The wardrobe was completely broken and there were pieces of wood on the floor. There were small pieces of paper too. I picked up 1 or 2 pieces. I realized they were part of a photograph. A cold wind came through the broken windows. I could hear a cat out in the cold. It was crying like a baby, poor thing. I wanted to run out of the room, but I had to find William first. The double bed was against the wall. There was a shape under the bedclothes. There was a pillow at the top end of the bed. It was over the head of the person in the bed. I picked the pillow up very gently. It was right over William's face. I knew immediately that he was dead. The face filled me with fear. The eyes were wide open and the mouth was wide open too. There were signs of fear in William's face. The eyes looked up at me, they looked up in fear. I put the pillow back over William's face very gently. I didn't want to touch anything before the police arrived. I stood in front of the body for a long time. I was too afraid to move. The room was evil, so evil. While I stood there, I noticed something strange on the pillow. There was a clear shape on it, like the shape of a hand.